When looking for the king of podcasts, you're at the wrong channel.
Well, excuse me!
Looking for good ideas for life? You're far from good hands.
Hey, bud, what's your problem?
If you think the listener is always right, you're far from the right place.
Out of order! Even in the future, nothing works!
Hosted by a Northeasterner by birth, but a rebel by choice.
Are you threatening me?
If you want a host that floats between love and madness,
and we know the night is always gonna be here anyway. Thinking of you's working up my appetite. Looking forward to a little afternoon delight.
then play on and listen to Crazy Train Radio.
All right, guys, listen to this blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Within the gaming world, there are your general gamers, but then there are those that enjoy the dark underbelly of gaming. If you're one of those that enjoy the dark underbelly of gaming, we certainly got the place to send you. Scorpion Lair Games. That's right, Scorpion Lair Games is the creators of the true crime hit Killers, the card game. Let's not forget they also have Killers Clothing Company, their profiler game, and things like the 5-Minute Murder channel on YouTube. And we certainly can't forget the new book that is certainly a hit, Beyond the Headliners, True Crimes, Myths, and Legends. Make sure you visit Jeff and the Scorpion Lair Games on Facebook and everywhere today.
Hi everyone, this is Dr. Brian Licuanan. I'm a psychologist. I'm on Crazy Train Radio, talking a little bit about mental health and spreading awareness. And for any of you out there, please don't be afraid to reach out for help.
Hey folks, it's your least favorite host in the podcast world, Croc, Jonathan Steele. And boy, do we have a good one for you today.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children's of all ages. Now, normally we have a lot of fun, a lot of laughs, and I'm sure we'll still do so tonight, but the underlining theme is a little more serious than we typically go, but we'll still have fun with this anyway. This next guest is an author, speaker, and a board-certified psychologist, which I know I probably need. Mr. Young could probably testify to that.
Don't mess with me, I'm one crazy mofo.
But he is practicing in Southern California. He specializes in insomnia and family crisis interventions, as well as having extensive experience in working with highly acute clients struggling with substance abuse disorders and mental health conditions. He is passionate about educating the public on mental health and substance addiction, and he has appeared on shows like The Doctor, Good Day LA Live, Dr. Drew Midday Live. His book here, which I have a copy of, and we'll have to get Mr. Young a copy, is called How to Get Your Resisting Loved One into Treatment. And let's welcome Dr. Brian. And Dr. Brian, how do you pronounce your last name? I'm sorry.
Licuanan. Licuanan. I know it's a little bit of a tongue twister.
Yeah, so I figured I'd ask because I don't want to butcher anything. And obviously, during the introduction, I mentioned we also have Brian Young from the Transatlantic Historical Podcast. Brian, how are you?
I am good. Thank you for having me on. And I know I usually come on for a bit of comic relief, but this is also a subject very near and dear to my heart as someone who suffers with mental illness and severe anxiety disorders and living a life as a semi-public figure, I guess you could call me. It's something that I've been very outspoken about. And, you know, I'm thrilled to meet you, Doctor, because like I said, it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. And I'm very vocal and outspoken about admitting when you need help and acknowledging that you need help or people you know need help. And you're the man. Let's face it. You're the man.
Well, let's go ahead and start with the book. There's so much stuff we can talk about and all, but we'll start with the book because I was doing a bunch of reading and listening on this interweb thing, and we know everything is 100% true. Right, Brian?
Oh, absolutely.
So, well, before we start with the book, obviously I gave you some credibility with the introduction and stuff, but I do think we should mention that you have nearly 20 years of experience as a licensed psychologist, and you deal with individual, family, and organizational treatments across the board. But I did hear that in another conversation you had that early in your life, I guess maybe 20s, and so you weren't sure where you wanted to go. Maybe police academy, maybe med school, maybe, you bounced around a little bit to where you found your direction. So when did you think you found your direction?
I found my direction probably. I was actually having a conversation with someone recently who is kind of in the same boat. She's 29 years old and is kind of struggling in her path in life and career. And it really, really struck up a nice conversation of how I could really validate and understand where she's coming from. So at about 31 years old is when it started to finally become clearer and crystallize of what I believe I should be doing. And you're absolutely right. My 20s were pretty directionless. I wrote about, it sounds like what you were mentioning from what I wrote about in my introduction is I was in undergrad school for probably almost 7 years. And
Tommy Boy Lake?
I'm sorry?
Tommy Boy Lake? Yeah.
Tommy Boy. I remember
I was
that.
in 7 years. They called them doctors.
Did you hear I finally graduated?
Yeah, and just a shade under a decade, too. All right.
You know, a lot of people go to college for 7 years.
I know. They're called doctors.
Yes, yes. And I remember watching that movie back when it came out. Obviously, that was a joke. And I just thought to myself, like, gosh, that's me. 6.5 years in undergrad school, and it was here a punchline in that movie. And yes, you're right. Law enforcement is something I explored. Pre-medical school was something I explored, and then I started to work in the mental health field, working with severely emotionally abused adolescents in my late 20s. And that's when it started to materialize. And not even then, as you may have read, that I entered another school in psychology, a PhD program called Industrial Organizational Psychology, which are your human resource directors. These are people who study behavior in the workplace. It has nothing to do with therapy. They develop instruments, they analyze data, pick the right employees, and so forth. And even there, I found out I pursued probably not the right fit for me. And so I ended up getting a master's in there, spending 3 years. And then I stumbled upon the clinical counseling program at that same university. And gratefully, it was a seamless transition. And I transitioned to that program. And ever since then, I feel like this is where I'm supposed to have landed. And this is in line with my values. I believe my skills, my visions, my principles. And I'm really happy where I landed. So that's kind of a little bit of a summary of my journey.
Right on. Mr. Young, Yeah, I was going to say, did you have something you'd like to start off with?
Well, I have to start out with, for people who are watching the video version of this podcast, not the audio version, the people listening, go watch it too, because you'll understand what I'm saying in a minute. I'm going to call bullshit on almost everything you just said, because you have not been practicing for over 20 years and decided where you were going in your 30s, because you look like you're 22 years old. Okay, first off, how did you find the Fountain of Youth, and where is it? Because, I'm in my 50s and I look a hell of a lot worse than you do.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Brian. And actually, it was funny. I was in another podcast with one of my teammates in a martial art I train, and we were talking about a serious topic about inner child and trauma. And I had mentioned my age on there, and he all of a sudden just said, "Shut up." And the whole conversation for like 10 minutes went on my skin regimen and my regimen. And it was funny. We had to pull it back. But thank you for that. I guess, honestly, I think a part of it is my mom and dad both look young. So I do think on some level there's a genetic component there. And one of the things I did share is some of the things I engage in and consume. Bone broth, if you're never familiar with bone broth, is really known for collagen, because as we age, the elasticity in our skin diminishes, and bone broth has been known to, with that collagen, to be able to help that. You can get bone broth in liquid form or powder form. And then something else that I use are like tallow oil, which is meat fat. And so it's a great moisturizer, and along with some other things but those are the two things that I think have made a difference, especially the bone broth. I noticed that I was getting the compliments like you have made ever since about 2 years ago when I started consuming bone broth. And but thank you for that.
Before Brian asks a serious question,
okay,
since you're talking skincare, all that stuff,
yes.
and I should mention the fitness with like jujitsu and stuff. Brian Young, I think we should hook him up with both Denise Stuff, who has her own skincare line, and also Anthony in Southern California as well.
They'll make me look like a teenager.
Well, Anthony does. He's 73 and looks like he's 43, but that's. I know I'll get a phone call when he hears this, but for saying that, but no, he's a stunt guy, martial arts, all that stuff. And I think you guys will get along on that stuff as well.
Thank you. I'd love to connect with them.
Yeah, we'll figure that out off air. But Brian, do you have something topical now that you called your bullshit?
I do. Like I said, it's really fascinating that you went into the field dealing, as you said, in your late 20s with youth that went through traumatic experiences and trauma. But you've really specialized in, as of late with the book, addiction and recovery. Now, were you pulled into the field of addiction recovery from working with troubled youth, because so many people turn to substance abuse at that point? Or was it just a natural evolution from schooling or from studying? And you see that, hey, drugs have been a problem since the dawn of man, but in the past 15 years in the U.S., it's really exploded again to a point where it hasn't been like this since probably the 70s. What drew you into that particular line? Was it working with the youth with trauma, or was it just natural evolution of education and society in general?
Mostly that latter part. I definitely got one of the things I always say, and it was very that working with that population of those severely emotionally and physically abused adolescents is that I think in many levels, a silver lining in working with that population is nothing shocked me anymore, is because sadly, many of them went through traumas, witnessing suicides, trafficking, abuse, substance abuse, and it really, really created this level of level of a threshold, emotional, mental threshold, where nothing really could shock me anymore. And I think it really laid a great foundation when working in the substance abuse population. And so, to answer your question, it pretty much happened organically as a result of my education. So, I went to graduate school in the University of Oklahoma. That's where I got my PhD. And I reside in California. And I needed to get what we call postdoctoral hours, which is after you get your doctorate, those are hours for licensure. And my best friend connected me with a psychiatrist that he knew at the hospital, and he was a really go-getter psychiatrist. And when I was working there, he said, "Hey, I'm opening up a adult residential treatment facility for substance abuse and mental health. Do you want to come on board?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so it just worked that way. And I got exposed to that population. And we were dealing with really highly acute mental health issues, bipolarity, schizophrenia, with heroin, meth, cocaine, alcoholism. And it was really, really, I think, a huge foundation in creating my path and vision and my desire to work with these highly acute populations. So that's pretty much how it happened. And now that I've finished my education, I'm able to direct where I want to go and what populations that I really want to help. So,
and it's fascinating because one thing that I talk about a lot on my show when I'm dealing with explaining having a diagnosed mental illness, that I was a heavy drinker throughout my late teens and 20s, and I'm sure that was as a result of that. And so many people want to blame mental illness on the addiction when it's really the other way around. The addiction is as a result of the mental illness, and we need better treatment for that. Yes. And warning signs, and people can't be afraid to admit they have problems. Like I said earlier, I'm in my 50s now. I'll be completely open and honest, because I like I said, I'm an advocate for this. The condition I have is a hereditary one. So it's technically more physical than mental, but I could trace it back several generations in my family to people that were committed to asylums, for good portions of their life because of the condition. It wasn't till late 20th, early 21st century science that we realized, oh, this is a brain chemical thing. We can actually treat this now. Mm-hmm. But, that's something that I've dealt with. But that shame, you would never talk about those relatives. I had to be there and put my mother in treatment facilities. And, you deal with the shame of that, even internalize it, that you don't want to talk about it and open it. And I think we're getting better to a point where people can openly discuss this. So like I said, I become an advocate, and I tell everybody, if you have a problem, any problems, talk about it, talk to people, talk to friends. And so many people don't see that the drug addiction or the alcohol addiction or the substance comes with the mental illness first.
Yes.
And so, I mean, the opioid crisis in America right now, do you think so much of that is a result of our terrible healthcare system when it comes to dealing with mental illness and these issues?
It could be. And you see a lot of great things there, Brian. As you were talking, you were hitting like all these bullet points that I typically address with a lot of these families or people who are struggling. And you might have to pull me back to remind me. But so to answer your question about the healthcare system, I think there's multitude of reasons of what's going on, whether it be a economic, whether it be cultural, whether it be access to care, whether it be all kinds of those factors play into a role why people struggle. And the other thing you had mentioned is when people, for one thing, I don't truly believe that someone is truly an alcoholic or a substance abuse addict without virtually alone. Like people say, hey, I don't have any issues, I'm just an alcoholic, or hey, I don't have really many issues, I just smoke a lot of meth. I said, almost always. I mean, always, I would say. I don't like to use absolute words, but 99.9% of the time, there is an underlying mental health condition or stress. You may not have been diagnosed with one. You may not meet all the criteria for an actual diagnosis, but the substance, to me, is just a sophisticated tool to help mitigate or lessen those symptoms. And so it doesn't matter what came first. Well, am I drinking because of my alcohol? Am I depressed because of my alcoholism, or do I have alcoholism because I'm depressed? It doesn't matter. Both of them, we have to hit them both head on. And there's I'm not sure how far you got in the book, but one of my must know says the reason why people, for example, turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms or substances is three words. And I don't know if you got to that part, but did anyone want to take a guess? Three words of why people, well, for example, have in their tool belt these unhealthy coping mechanisms or their drug of choice. Three words.
I have not. I don't have the book yet.
Yeah. That's why I said
I
we'll
will. But I'll tell you, for me, it was self-medication, the two words, without realizing it at the time. I mean, it's not till years later and I reflected that I realized what I was doing was self-medicating.
Yeah.
But what are the three words? Because I'm writing it down now, too.
Because it works, right? And a lot of people have all these things like it numbs me, it to detach from the pain. All those are very valid and very true, but on a more broad level, because it works. And if you wouldn't be using it, or if it didn't work, it worked for what it was supposed to, intended to, but all of a sudden, as we became more tolerant and dependent on it, it became counterproductive and dysfunctional. But when I say that to families or even people who are in treatment, like, hey, do you know why you use heroin? Do you know why you pop opiate pills? And I said, because it works. And they're like, oh, yeah, you're right. That's why someone uses alcohol over opiates. That's why some people use heroin over fentanyl, right? Is because it works. And what we do in treatment is we find other options. One of my biggest beliefs is whenever we tell someone the human condition of what they cannot do, we resist. And so what I believe, my approach to coaching people is you give them options. I want that. I literally say on that belt, imagine, Matt, that belt around your waist is you have all these different tools. I want your heroin on that tool belt, believe it or not. I don't say that, hey, you can never use it again. What I want to do is I want to make it less accessible by having other options. Like a lot of people who struggles, they don't have other options. They don't have meditation techniques. They don't have therapy. They don't have fellowship. And they're using the things that work. And so that's kind of my idea with that. But it's really important to understand the people and families, they do it because it works.
100%. Like I said, I was self-medicating without realizing it. Mm-hmm. I quit drinking when I started meditating. And I have two brothers, both of which have the same condition I do, both of which were medicated for it years before I was, even though one of them's a younger brother. And, you know, the doctors told me, well, until it got to a point where I needed the medication to level up the things. The reason I was able to go 10 years longer than they were was because of the meditation and because of the drinking.
Yeah.
Because I was using something else to mess. I still meditate. I don't drink anymore. But which one's more harmful?
Yeah.
Yeah. So but like you said, it works. Why do athletes use steroids if they're illegal and they're banned? Because they work.
Yeah. Yeah.
I never had an issue with addiction, but Brian knows I like to have a cocktail or two. I'm not bad that way. But it leads to my question because of learning the system as I was going through everything for it. And you guys kind of touched on it with what you were just discussing. And you have the mental health side of things, but also the substance abuse issues, you know, and sometimes they can intermingle in not great ways. So obviously one of the things I heard when I was going down the path after my diagnosis and stuff was they mentioned about sometimes, is it what you guys were talking about, was it the mental health feeding into the substance or the substance feeding into the mental health? Because that was part of the case when I applied for disability that they brought up to the judge and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So as a professional, and for as long as you've been doing it, how do you try to decipher what is what? Yes, you have the term of because it works and stuff, but how do you, and obviously everything's a case by case situation,
Yeah.
But how do you try to decipher how murky those waters can be?
Yeah. And great question. And exactly that right word, murkiness, is that's what a lot of us clinicians are navigating through is these murky waters for various reasons. Sometimes the person you're talking to, a client, aren't the best historians, right? They're not the best historians, and sometimes they're just not honest, right? And there could be reasons for that. And or they're just lack of insight. So there's a lot of, so one of the things with psychology in the field of psychiatry, we call it an art, at least I do, is because you can have one person use a substance. Let's say they're the same age, weight, and gender and race, and it can affect
something I'm going to bring up, but go ahead.
it can affect one person differently. You can have a medication regimen, exact same medication regimen with all those demographics similar, and one person it could be miserable for and one people perfect. And so psychiatry, psychology is an art is because it's not like you're going to get a cholesterol test, a blood test, and there's a certain medication for it. And so it takes a lot of understanding the person's story and narrative, their history, understanding their personality, their strengths, their struggles. And of course, you have to rely on, if you don't have information from other people supporting them, their level of clarity and or honesty. And so that is a great question, and it's not an easy question. And after a while, when you start doing this, you start to figure out the right way to build rapport and help guide a path and formulate some conclusions and some hypotheses on that. And so, and I think as you build rapport with someone and they become more transparent and vulnerable and honest, you're able to get a better picture. And that's what I look at it. I believe, I tell clients all the time, I can only help you as much as you tell me. And our job is to put pieces of the puzzle together to create this collage and create this theme and these basic conclusions worth further exploration. So that is sort of my comprehensive general answer to that question, but it's a great question.
Yeah,
and it's funny. Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
No, you go. I'll piggyback on it afterwards.
Okay, so it's funny because a friend of the family was in the medical field for 40 plus years and stuff, and he's still doing it as a regular physician, and knew my history and stuff before he became my physician. He was a family friend.
Yes.
And came into where I was working at the time. I was doing some work at a hospital. And it's like, hey, during my meal break, hey, man, hey, how you doing? All that stuff. And he, hey, let me buy you a cup of coffee, So I buy him a cup of coffee and we're talking. And he kind of said the same thing you just mentioned there. And because he was asking how I was doing with everything, with my diagnosis and all that stuff. And he goes, think about it this way. And if me or Mr. Young had a heart attack, or if we broke our leg or something physical, there is a specific game plan that folks would go on, that the doctors and everybody would go on based on the scans, the blood work, EKGs, whatever the case may be, depending on the circumstance. With mental health, we're still learning so much about the, we maybe know 10%, or let's say, because everybody's chemical balances are different. And like you said during your answer there, when I asked about being murky, it's what works for me, for my stuff, may not work for Brian Young if he had the same stuff, size, weight, or just our body chemistry, all that stuff. But I wanted to ask, at least from the book as well, because it's part of the title, is family, friends, and other people close to, say, a particular person may feel stuck in trying to reach out and help this person and their loved ones or whoever this person is that they know. But they know they're unwell, and this person might be resistant to accepting help. What do you suggest, because it's part of what you do with these family and friends and all that stuff, to try to assist this person start to go down the road of health and help?
Good. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you
another
3 words. right? It's because so you're alluding to people who are chronically struggling, chronically meaning long lasting. People who have been through this, people who have been through treatment, they went to treatment, went back home, they struggled, they stopped taking their medication, they went back to drinking or using substances. And there's this dynamic, which I get all the time, people dealing with years, decades even,
Cyclical.
cyclical. Okay. And I tell the family members, and this is a story that I always tell about, which was an actual family that came to see me, and their loved one struggled with alcohol, bipolar disorder, and excessive marijuana use, which to the point would kick a psychotic episode. And his parents were living with him, and every 2 or 3 in the morning, he would kick down their door, yelling and screaming at them, F you, you're the cause of all this stuff. And they came to one of my support groups one time, and I said, oh, okay. I said, exactly how many doors has he kicked down? And they go, about 13, 12 or 13 doors. Okay. And I said, do you know why he can do that? Hence my 3-word question. What are some ideas that you have why he can kick down, 13 doors?
Because you let him.
Okay.
I was thinking along the same lines.
Yeah. And you're right. You're right. You got the first word right.
You allow it.
Yeah, because you can. Because he can. Because he can. Because he can. Right? When is it not okay? Is because
that comes to boundaries, and I was going to eventually get to, but
yes, boundaries. Boundaries is another big one, but and that's why I ask all these families. They say, "Oh my gosh, we've been to 10 treatments already, and when they come out, they struggle, they relapse, they stop, like I said, taking their meds." And I said, "Well, how long have you been doing this? 10 years. Do you know why he or she can continue to go to treatment and leave and relapse? Because he or she can." And so that's what I work with people. So 99.9% of the families I've worked with a lot of dysfunctional and toxic families. Parents were the drug abusers, they were the physical abusers, or whatever they may be, traumas. And I say 99.9% of the family members mean well, right? Just because you come from a good place doesn't mean it's the best place. I write about a couple whose son they grew up in the era of smoking a lot of marijuana in the 60s and 70s, and they had one of their children who started expressing interest in marijuana at about 12, 13. And so what the parents did was, hey, well, let's teach them the responsible way. So they smoked out with them. So what happened a couple of years later? He got addicted to marijuana, alcohol, and so forth. And it had so much shame and guilt that, Brian, you talk about shame as well. And they said, hey, Dr. Brian, we believe he is the reason why he's an addict, and we feel guilt and a great deal of shame. I said, were you trying to come from a bad place? No. Then you got to let go, release yourself from that guilt. Because that guilt, this disease, which I talk about, I personify this disease, is it loves a lot of attributes, and guilt and fear are the two most prominent ones. And so because, like I said, they can. So that's what I tell the family members. 99% of the families come from a good place. It's just that we have to change the strategy. And so that's what I tell families. It's what you were mentioning is that boundary setting. What that is to me in one sentence is communicating very clearly what you're willing to participate and not participate in. People think a boundary setting is this aggressive, in your face, push against the wall, stop. And maybe that is a form of boundaries if appropriate. But boundaries to me is on a very simple level, very clear of what I am going to be a part of and not be a part of. And that's what I teach families to do is, of course, other things like identifying leverages and putting them a point of desperation where accepting help is one of the few options. But you have to clearly tell them, delineate that we love and care about you. It's just that we're not going to support this lifestyle any longer because we are doing more harm than good. So that's the vision that has to start. And of course, there's all the details and the skills going in from there. But it's also one last thing too. It's an all hands deck approach. That's what's critically important because there's a correlation. We tend to think that the more harm someone's caused, the more hurt someone's caused, the more work they have to do to make it better, to make amends. If you're like a family of 3, like that family I was telling you about, if you want to be invested in change, doesn't matter who did what, who was doing this and that, moving forward, if you want change, you have to assume 33.33% responsibility, accountability, and each of you three have to work 100% on your 33.33%. Is because what happens is if we don't do that, if the person's in recovery because they've caused chaos, you've got to do all the work. I'm not going to participate. It creates this helplessness, this feeling alone and abandoned, but also it creates this power differential and resentment. And so those are some of the major concepts that I tell families up front before we go into the more detailed skills and step by step.
It's really fascinating because a very dear friend of mine is a therapist that deals with people or families of people who were in coercive or controlling or destructive cults, and helping to, a large part of what he does is dealing with the families of people who are still in them and how to help a family to get someone out, because you can't take the blame and just throw it in someone's face. You're going to push them away farther. Yes. And it's the same thing with abuse. Now, and another thing that's very similar is, and I'm against it, court-ordered drug counseling.
Okay.
Because I don't think it's going to take unless you want help or you realize you need the help. If you get busted and the judge says you're going to there or prison, I'll take the course. They don't want to quit. And it's not going to. So it's such a gray area, but it's so fascinating that with what he does with the dealing with the controlling and coercive and the destructive cults is so similar, but it has to be a clinical and different approach.
Yeah.
But it's all out of love and all out of the same place.
Yes. Yes. Well, if I can comment, that's an excellent point, Brian, you bring up. And what's important to recognize, and research consistently shows, and I understand that, and sometimes people have this idea, is that people have to have bags packed and ready to go to treatment centers. I'm ready to go, heal me. Yes, that can lend itself to higher chances of being successful. But research shows that people who are forced into treatment can be as successful as people who are highly motivated. And so what's one of the things I write about is that getting healthy is not just willpower alone. Willpower to me, if I was to break down percent, is 15%. Is because what I also mentioned is there's this window of 30 to 90 days where the brain is healing because of the substance use. You're withdrawing, you're angry, you're resentful, you're not talking about things, you are repressed memories. And I've seen it because not only is it research-based, but I've seen it countless times anecdotally in the work that I've done in treatment where you get people there who are court-ordered. I literally had a client who said when I leave treatment, he was bipolar, meth use, and psychotic. And he said, when I leave here in treatment, I'm going to go home and shoot my mom and dad for putting me here. And obviously he was psychotic. And literally within 2 weeks after stabilizing, getting medication, getting away from the meth and taking the mood stabilizers, his family were part of treatment and he had a loving relationship with them. And so that's one of the things that people think is, yes, motivation. People have to have some level of inkling of to pick up a weight. I use this analogy in a weight room. If you want to lose weight, you could go to the most sophisticated gyms, but if you're not at least willing to enter the gym and at least somewhat move and pick up a weight, it's going to be very difficult. And so that's what I like to tell people is that people who are put in situations can be successful. And like I said, with those court ordered, is they start to have these aha moments and realizations like, holy crap, there's other people, for example, there's other people like me, or wow, I don't have to smoke weed to feel good. I don't have to drink alcohol for people to like me. And they start learning these things in a treatment or recovery process. Or wow, it's okay to talk about my sexual trauma and not feel judged. And so that is the power of a treatment process, is this unraveling of this story, narrative, and habits and belief systems, coupled with healing, sleeping, eating, exercising, medication, therapy group, learning new skills, that's a really, really powerful thing. And so I think, like I said, that's a great point. And if someone's willing, that heightens the probability of someone being successful. However, people who aren't willing can be successful if the right measures are in place and they're put in a situation. Because a lot of people who are resistant, that's all they know. I literally have people who grieve alcohol, grieve a lifestyle because they're so afraid of what that other lifestyle may look like. And as time goes on and their brain heals, like, wow, there is another life out there. What happens is where people get stuck in that 30 to 90-day window. This is miserable. I want to leave. I want to leave treatment. Families take them back in, and the cycle starts all over again. And so that's what I'm doing to unstuck people, is to break a pattern of action in behavior. So,
another question I wanted to ask, piggyback off the last one, was when you're dealing with someone as a professional, how can you tell you're getting the truth and everything you need from them, and not just out of them not being deceitful, but I know that I would not have talked the same way to a therapist that I would now when I was in my 20s or 30s.
Yeah.
Not because I would necessarily be trying to lie or hide them, but more protect myself. I would feel more vulnerable. That now that I'm older, I would feel more comfortable. How do you know when you're dealing with someone like the 30-year-old me would not have been as open as he wasn't. I was drinking and in shame of all the problems that the 50-year-old me would. But when you're dealing with someone, how can you tell if you're actually getting that one that's really opening up, or how can you tell when they're not?
Well, that's the reality, is you may never know. And so to answer your question, one of the most critical elements in therapy that has a predictor for therapy success is what we call therapeutic alliance. Means that we're aligned together. And the way you do that is through things like rapport building and validation. So validation is another concept I write about, which I believe is the antidote to miscommunication in relationships. Validation, in a summary, means to acknowledge and accept someone's truth. Doesn't mean you have to believe it. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it. I've validated people who are going through a psychotic episode. This one gentleman literally thought the mafia was after him, looking out the windows. Did I agree with him and say, yeah, you know what, the mafia is after you? No. I said, you know what? You seem really scared, right? I'm here to keep you safe. And I could tell you this, as long as you stay here in the house in treatment, that we'll do everything we can to keep you safe. And literally after he stabilized, he was bipolar and psychotic off meth. He was like laughing, hey, Dr. Brian, I know I was talking really goofy last week, and hey, but hey, thank you for hanging in with me, is because I didn't judge him. If someone truly believes that the newscaster on the news is talking to them, your job at that moment in time is not to convince them that no, they're not talking to you. Later down the road, as they stabilize more, you say, hey, you seem really fearful and scared that that person's talking to you. Hey, like I said, you validate them. You doesn't mean you agree or believe them, but you at least acknowledge their truth. And you try that in any relationship validation. You hyperspeed your way to conflict resolution. But back to your question, after rapport building and building that alliance in a safe place, which is critically important, one of the things I do is I put down the tug of war rope. The first thing I tell people, because I get it all the time in treatment, like, hey, Dr. Brian, you know what? Rum was my issue. I think I can manage my beer. You know what, Dr. Brian? Heroin was my issue. I think I can manage my marijuana use. Or, hey, you know what? I've got a lot of mindfulness skills. I don't think I need my mood stabilizers anymore for my mania. I tell them all the time, I'm not here to convince you what you are or are not, or what you can and cannot do. I'm here to give you another option. Once you leave these doors here, that same lifestyle is waiting right outside, ready for you. I can't promise you people in your life are going to they're going to support that lifestyle. But I'm here to give you some choices and options and a preview of what another life can look like. And that alone takes out the power struggle. And that's what I was alluding to earlier, is when you tell the human condition of what they cannot do, our natural instinct is to resist. So I give them the option. And that's what I said earlier is I can only help you as much as you tell me. So there's going to be some moments in a session where, hey, that's not what you said earlier. I'm not sure how truthful you were being, right? I just want to let you know to realize, how you believe I can help you. And so the responsibility is put on the person. And that's one of my biggest enlightenments that I've worked on with therapy is allow them to make the choice. Just like with a child, eat vegetables, eat vegetables, eat vegetables, rather than, hey, you want to be strong like Superman or do you want to be like SpongeBob? Nothing against SpongeBob, by the way. But
I don't want to be like either. I mean, I want the belt you were talking about earlier, like Batman, though.
Yeah.
That would be pretty cool.
Like Batman. But that's what I do is you give them that option is because when you tell a child, eat the vegetables or you can't do this, they resist. And so I hope that answers at least some insight into that question you had, Brian.
It does. And I'd like to say that I like telling kids, eat your broccoli because it'll make your pee smell funny. And then they're so interested in trying that to see that they do. 2, I need you to be honest for a minute here. All right. Sure. I'm putting you on the spot.
Sure.
All right. Because I did
about my skin.
Yeah. No, it's not about your skincare. Because look at me. Devilishly handsome. I did a little research on you, and I know you went to California University of Fullerton.
Yes.
I know you went to Pepperdine.
Yes.
And I know you went to University of Oklahoma.
Yes.
Who the hell do you cheer for in basketball? Honestly, because I'm a UCLA guy all the way.
Well, okay. Well,
he's saying that because Walton recently passed, but go ahead.
Yeah. I'm a Sooner. I identify on a football level, not so much basketball, but definitely on a football level. Number one, Cal State Fullerton and Pepperdine do not have football teams. So
They all basketball teams, though.
They got basketball teams, right? They definitely got basketball team. But Oklahoma Sooners are who I am.
I'll give you that in football, but you got to give me a basketball team. Come on.
Collegiate? Jeez.
UCLA.
I do like UCLA. And but that would probably be my closest second. I know. And Sooner basketball, they've got a basketball team too, but I would say UCLA over the other school. Would be my choice.
The other one, very good answer.
And I know Jim Ross would like him for being a Sooner, but
oh yeah, Jim.
Yeah.
Oh my God! And for the 20-foot ladder with a spear on Jeff Hardy. For the love of God, Jeff Hardy may be broken, smack dab in half.
No, but I figured you would know that name, being a Sooner and from spending time out there.
And my son, and we go to WWE all the time.
So there you go. And man, we're really gonna have to hook him up, Brian.
Yeah, we'll trade books.
Yeah, we'll have to deal with that when we're done. But there's 3 things on what you guys were bantering back and forth there, and I got in my notes, which is scary that I stayed a little organized tonight. And obviously, like I mentioned earlier about different things for different people work and don't work and all that stuff. So there is, I would say, different levels and styles of growth.
Yes.
There's also, I would think, in certain levels, a safe level of discomfort. Because obviously, when you're digging through the murkiness that we were talking about earlier, there's going to be some discomfort along the way. It's just a nature of the beast, or however you want to put it. But how do you also work with the family to help with all this so everybody's on the same page? Because you mentioned like the family of 3, 33 and a third, 33 and a third, 33 and a third. Have you ever found yourself where you have to turn to the family and go, almost have a double intervention, if that makes sense? You go, whoa, hey, time out here with whatever the situation is.
Yes, for sure. And that's where the family intervention, when we say intervention, we think of the person struggling, sit them in a room in a semicircle, and we, tell them how we feel and what we need from them, and which is very, very important and critical. what I have found a lot is there's an upfront process that needs to take place with that, and that is the intervention on the family themselves to solidify a vision and to vet who's going to be part of this, what I call the coalition. The coalition is that team of people who are going to be on that boat. These are the people who are going to maintain the boundaries, who are going to maintain the vision, who are healthy enough to not let emotions get in the way. They're not going to be the ones who will enable this pattern of process happening all over again. And so sometimes that could be a parent even, that could be a grandparent, a sibling. And so there's a vetting process. And so a lot of times that 100% means that those people have to work on their own struggles. I've had people who had their own alcoholism, their parents, that they had to get work on that. The people had unresolved traumas from early in life that they need to go see a therapist for, a support group. And so that is all part of their getting themselves to be in a form of readiness to be a part of this process. And so a lot of times that comes out in conversations when it's just the family alone. And when I take a history, like, well, what's happened in the past? You can really, really identify through people's stories of when people have been struggling chronically as well, what's happened in the past, what has went wrong? Because they'll say like, well, if they went to treatment for 30 days or 90 days or 6 months, and eventually this happened. Okay. I said, well, there's a threshold there for some reason. And how do we break that barrier from taking place? And a lot of times it's, we allow the person to stray away from their own recovery, their fellowship. And speaking of recovery real quick, recovery to me, we're all in some form of recovery. Recovery we think of is a substance abuse issue, or you sprained your ankle, or you had a stroke. But we all have a form of a disease. A disease is also, in addition to a medical issue or a psychiatric condition, is any entity that causes impairment in our life. And so racism, if that causes problems in your life, that's a disease. Jealousy, that materialism, hedonism, those aren't medical diagnoses per se, but they're entities that can cause problems in your life. And so with that, we all have a version of our own disease or diseases. Therefore, we're all in some form of recovery, which is just a plan in place for healthier living. And I believe a healthy recovery, which has a lot of different attributes, is the guide to a lot of life's challenges and questions, because it causes things like Brian I was referring to as honesty. And I do write about H2O. I don't know if that rings a bell to anyone, but so you did get pretty far in there. But H2O is, I believe, I call it the vaccine to the disease. It's these three elements that if you're high on every single one of those, you will be almost nearly guaranteed you'll be successful, because those are the three most robust and resilient factors that differentiates people who continue to progress in the recovery and those who do not.
As I was going to say, that we're all human, so we all have this terrible condition called life that is 100% fatal. Not one of us is going to survive it. We're all going to die eventually, so we all have, trauma. No, but in all seriousness, you're right. Everything that affects you, you have to recover from. If you hate your job, you're going to have to recover from the trauma of that. If you have everything. And I think that's important. That's something that most people don't realize. Like you said, they think of people who need help as just, they drink or they take drugs. No, everything is part of that. That is something that I always try to tell audiences when I talk about my condition, that, hey, it's not just drugs and alcohol or things that cause strife and we need treatment for and help with. And that's why people need to be willing to ask for that help and seek the help and be honest with people like you who can help them.
Yeah, and that's why honesty is, I believe, the most important tool in the impetus to change. Because if you're not being honest with yourself and others, you are harboring secrets. Secrets turn into resentments, which is unresolved anger. And I call resentments the acid of our inner being, or the termites of our soul, because that's why if you look at mostly any modality, 12-step recovery, Buddhism, many other mindfulness techniques, and all of those, working on resolving resentments is the most critical factor. Any religion will talk about that. And so
I'm glad you brought that up. It's something that I wanted to bring up with you, that in America especially, so many people rely on 12-step programs, Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, which, whether they'll publicly admit it or not, are faith-based treatments. And, you know, the largest growing segment of American society right now are people of no faith or atheists. What recommendations would you have? Because when people tell them, go to an Alcoholics Anonymous, a 12-step program, that's not going to help someone who is, you know, it'll turn them off more than anything if they're someone of no faith or agnostic or atheist. I mean, what would you advise at that point?
Yeah, and I get that a lot with people who are agnostic, atheist, or what have you, and they do get turned off. And with the God talk and, you know, the 12-step recovery, there's a lot of God. And for those people that were in actually treatment, that was part of the program to go to 12-step recovery, and they knew that up front. One thing I tell them to do is, if you don't have a God, so to speak, refer to as something just greater than you. That could be human nature, the ocean. That could be Mother Nature, just outer space, just something, or a better version of yourself. And when I was able to do that with them, they were able to think different, even like a better version of myself. That's my greater power. And so that's one way I helped them navigate through that really helped them. And then the 12 steps, you know, if you really think about it, what does it do? Essentially, it's be able to recognize that I have this disease that's caused impairment in my life, that there's this greater power that maybe be able to help me, and I have character defects, and I harbor resentments, and I've hurt people, and then I need to make amends, which is to repair and change, and then be of service to others. I mean, if you really think about just those elements alone, you know, the world can be a different place, right? If we're honest and accept our character defects. But also, if it's not 12-step recovery, you know, by the way, there's smart recovery that doesn't have the God component to it and so forth. That's also helpful for people. But there's all kinds of other different modalities out there. And when I talk about treatment, I'd like to differentiate in the title of my book. And sometimes people say, well, treatment is this formal treatment. You got to go to an institution, but I don't have money and stuff like that. So treatment to me also can just mean get them to a point of just accepting help. Some religions have their own programs for it, and other different modalities out there. And so, so there's lots and lots of different approaches, a lot of support groups out there that can help. But the biggest thing that's really, really important, and when people ask me all the time, you know, I said, if there's one thing why you come to therapy, or you go to a 12-step meeting, or you go to a grief and loss support group, I tell them there's one thing. It's accountability. If I could summarize it in one word, accountability. Yes, there may be fellowship. Yes, you may be able to do all these other things, great attributes that come along with it, but it is accountability. And that's the most important element. And so that's where I try to help people when they're resistant towards something, like a therapy. I said, it's just a form of accountability as well. So, so just know that. That's a great question. And that really is a stumbling block for a lot of people, why they don't get help. Just know that there's other ways of getting help, but fellowship is critically important, because if you're going to truly make a change, you cannot do it on your own. You need people who will hold you accountable. Fellowship. I tell people all the time, when you leave treatment, I need 5 people. 5 people. And that can't be mom, dad, spouse, uncle, and auntie, right? They may hold you accountable, but as you know, as a family member, they're not going to call you and be as honest, because there's emotions involved. Well, I can't say this to him because his sister might find out, or I can't say this to uncle because that might offend, you know, his wife. I say 5 people who will call you on your BS and hold you accountable. That could be a therapist. That could be a sponsor for your 12 steps. That could be your psychiatrist. That could be a good friend who's healthy for you. And that could be a priest, a pastor, a coach. But 5 people who will hold you accountable. And so just know that fellowship is critically important, because you cannot get better on your own.
So I actually, with this, there's 2 things that stand out for me. Well, one thing that stands out for me that you didn't say, but I know in doing my homework would fit all that, and that being practice what you preach.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I found interesting, I should say, is you find, at least when in your research and education over the years and all that. Things being on a spectrum. So could you maybe talk about things being on a spectrum?
Yeah. And so what I mean by a spectrum is that nothing is really, really dichotomous, meaning happiness is on a spectrum. We're not either happy or not happy. We're either on a high scale, very happy, or little to no happiness. Depression, right? Speaking of depression, it goes mild, moderate, severe. You're not just depressed or not depressed. If you're struggling, have mild level depression, moderate level depression, or severe depression. Pain, right? It's either completely no pain or something. It's usually on a spectrum. And so that's what I mean by that is because in the recovery process, for example, people think like, well, I'm no longer an alcoholic anymore, right? And I'm cured, or there's never going to be an issue again. And whenever we use, that's why I said absolute words, never, always. Those are very, very dangerous words. As you know, in conversations or arguments you've had with people, you bring in an absolute word, you know where that's going. Well, you always do this, you never do this. And because almost always, and here I am using the same word, it's not true, it's not valid. And so spectrum, when I work with a spectrum, and because with a spectrum, it's easier to gauge and you can also track improvement. And so just like in recovery, right? No one's ever completely healed. It's always going to be what I call on the radar. If you first go into treatment and your depression is here, and if you've been struggling chronically, we want depression to be over here. Like it's not going to be eclipsing you. It's going to be in the corner. And what I talk about is we always respect its capabilities, because what we say is always in the corner doing push-ups, your disease, your alcoholism, your anxiety, your PTSD. But it's not here through work. We're going to do enough where we re-empower ourselves. We're able to manage its symptoms. And it's always in the corner there waiting for us. But it never completely disappears. And that's one thing I'm being honest with people. They think, oh, well, I'm going to treatment. I'm never going to be anxious again. I'm never going to have thoughts of suicide. I'm never going to have cravings for taking a drink or taking a hit, And I said, no, it's going to be there. Our job is to manage it and respect its capabilities, which is part of the H2O model, which is humility, respecting what we're up against. You disrespect anything, a mountain if you're hiking, the ocean if you're scuba diving, right? You know what can happen when you disrespect the capabilities of anything. So
yeah, and it's something that I think is so important to tell people, and it's something that I tell people. The company that I work for during my day job, when I'm not doing books and lectures and podcasts, I do work a day job that pays the rent, because all the stuff that I love doing doesn't.
Yeah.
One of the things I do for the company I work for is I volunteer to be there for people who want to talk about maybe having problems and need help. And not that I'm a therapist or anything, but it's just that I volunteered because it's something that I've gone through, and I want people to be able to feel comfortable talking about it and being able to help them look for help.
Mm-hmm.
And what I always tell them is there are days where it is overwhelming to still. The anxiety and the depression can be so bad some days, but I know it's not going to be every day now.
Yeah.
And there are techniques to bring myself out of it when that hits me, when you learn what it is, that it's not something that ever goes away. Me and my brothers, like I said, we all have the same condition, and we have a code word for it, because we all talk to each other every day. And my brother will call me, how you feeling? And if I say, well, I'm riddled, that means I'm having one of those bad days, and I'm just going to have to work my way through it.
Yeah.
And that's all we have to say to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing is, please, people, realize when you're dealing with someone who suffers with anxiety or depression, asking them, well, what's wrong? Why don't you just cheer up? Makes things worse. And that's another thing I always tell people. You're going to have everyone in your life tell you, well, what's wrong? Just cheer up. I mean, everything's, fine, cheer up. Because they don't understand.
Yes.
So it will make things worse unless you realize that they don't mean harm by it. Yeah. Just know that they don't understand. Mm-hmm. Kind of let it roll.
Exactly. Yeah. And then for the people too, and that's a great point you bring up for people who may not understand, and that triggers the person even worse. But on the other note, for the people that are trying to support someone, it's okay. Silence is okay. It's okay to be silent and just be present with someone. I was actually talking to someone the other day who was having a panic attack, and all I did was just sat there just sat there, let her breathe. I gave her little pointers here and there. Mind your breath, breathe in and out. But all I was there was present. I wasn't trying to solve something. As a human condition, that's why beginning therapists, we watch videos of ourselves, which is very, very, very uncomfortable and cringeworthy because then you can hear your voice and you see yourself on camera, which you normally don't do too much beforehand. At least I didn't. And the discomfort with silence. And silence is very, very powerful. And so I've learned to just be silent. There's sometimes I'm just silent for maybe a minute and just being present with the person. So we don't have to solve the problem. We don't have to fill in the air, but being silent and present. And questions you may ask someone is, hey, by reflecting, one way to validate someone is by identifying their emotion. Wow, you sound really, really hurt by that. Wow, you sound really, really you feel really abandoned by that. That alone skyrockets rapport building and validation. Those two things. One thing, identifying an emotion and just rephrasing what they said. What I heard you say is you felt really, really marginalized when your boss didn't ask you to be a part of the creative development of that project. Identifying an emotion and rephrasing what they're telling me tells you I see you. And you could just do that alone. And so hope some of your listeners out there who find themselves in that situation is it's okay to be silent. It's okay to get comfortable with silence.
My final thing I would like to bring up, and I appreciate the time, Dr. Brian.
Sure.
I know Brian does as well, too.
Very much.
This has been educational and informative. And I know we can probably do a part 2, which would be great. But
I'm happy.
But yeah, we'll figure that out when we turn off the little red button. I appreciate that. But with you, being as you work in the mental health game, there's got to be time for self-care. Yeah, because that's important for anybody. Would you say that the weight training, but also training in jiu-jitsu is your self-care to kind of give you that mental break to be able to have that deep breath and deep release?
Yes. And thank you for bringing that up. And so weight training alone, yes, physiologically helps increase serotonin and dopamine release and stress. However, I've been working out weight training most of my life, at least since I was 13 years old. But in the past 6 years, what you mentioned which I believe has been one of my biggest life and game changers, has been training and competing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And so for those people who aren't familiar with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it is a grappling submission martial art that has beginning origins and etiology from judo. It originally came from Japan and was introduced and then popularized in Brazil. And it was originally designed for the smaller, weaker person to be able to manage or defeat the bigger person. And it has been so metaphorical because of the mental, physical, and spiritual component that's involved with it. We relate it to as the human chess game, where it is a different problem every single day, where every position you're in. And one of the biggest things that it creates is a level of discomfort. And a lot of times, I believe we have a culture, I can only speak for the Americans right now as a culture, is I believe our threshold for navigating through discomfort has greatly diminished. That's why we can turn to an opiate, a pill, a Xanax, drink a little alcohol, is because our limit and ceiling for enduring pain has greatly, greatly been diminished. And so that has taught me to, number one, be uncomfortable, be okay to be uncomfortable and know that there's a solution if I'm just patient and wait for it, and to challenge myself beyond limits I never knew about. And so, yeah, thank you for asking about that.
Well, and another idea just hit my head that would fit. And with that kind of thing, I will bring up after the fact too. But Mr. Young, definitely going to have to connect him with Mr. Fick too up in San Jose.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds like, but where is the best place for people to get the book? Okay. Would it be your personal website, or where would you suggest?
3 main areas. You can get it definitely on my website, at drbrianlicuanan.com. And there, it shows the book and a little bit of, there's even an excerpt of the book there, like the first 8-10 pages, and some of my other media appearances, like this podcast, will be posted on there for information and education. And on the website, there's also a link to Amazon, and it can also be on Barnes and Nobles. And there's about 12 other distributors that you can find it on. But Amazon is probably the best way, the most efficient way to probably access the book.
Mr. Young, is there anything you'd like to bring up before we?
I would just really like to thank you for your time and for the work that you do, and just for being there and not only helping people, but helping raise awareness to the issues. And with all my heart, I just really want to thank you.
Thank you. And if I can just say with that as well, is that one thing, a message I like to tell families out there who are really struggling with a loved one or a person struggling themselves is really, really maintain hope. That's one of the biggest messages of my book, because I know we can feel helpless and hopeless, but families can come together. Some of the most dysfunctional families through the recovery or treatment process have become closer and more connected than they ever have been, especially when they're willing to work on their own struggles and challenges. And so really, really have hope. And what you do today in these platforms, and I love these things, is what you're doing out there is on many levels is you're saving lives on many ways, because you're giving people permission to talk about their issues. And you have two people, your varied levels of professions, and be able to talk about, and your self-disclosures of yourself and family members really, really validates, and it takes away the stigma. And like I said, it gives people permission to be okay to talk. And so people don't really realize, and I know it's sometimes when I say it, that, hey, you're saving lives, or you may have saved one life among many lives. It's really true, is because that message out there could be reaching someone late at night when they're thinking about not living anymore, thinking about breaching their sobriety date, or someone thinking about doing something drastic. And so I really appreciate what you do as well. And it's fortuitous how we met. I messaged Jonathan on
IG,
Instagram. I just said, hey, what's up? Said, if you ever want a guest on, please do it. And I do that. I do that stuff, and I'm so passionate about spreading it. And so I just think there's no such thing as coincidences. I do think things happen for a reason. So I appreciate you both as well.
Well,
thank you.
Well, here, I'll go full disclosure since we did that. It's funny in a certain way, and people know I'm not a religious guy or anything like that. But there was something big picture that brought us together. And I told Mr. Young this before you joined the room, and that I was scrolling through IG and happened to follow you at first because for you, that some of the things that came on my feed, and if you have an opportunity, grab the book, folks. It was you were doing an appearance at Barnes and Noble near you, and I go, okay, well, that's a different thing, because normally we're sports, entertainment, all that fun stuff. So anyway, I go, okay, that seems interesting. Start doing a little digging, because you know how we go on rabbit holes in the internet here. And then Dr. Brian, like he said, sent a message saying, hey, how you doing? And we just got that ball rolling. And I do appreciate the time and stuff. So make sure you visit the website. The link will be below and all this. So Dr. Brian, thank you.
Thank you both.
Hey there, Friday fans. We know how much you enjoy the movies. Enjoy grabbing your Friday merchandise and interacting with the Friday family, whether it be at conventions or during our particular watch-alongs. Well, when you're looking to get yourself masks, why not check out our friends over at Camp Blood Customs out of New York State and order your specific custom mask from any of the films. All orders are made specifically. Your needs and wants are. Make sure you find Camp Blood Customs on Facebook, Instagram, and all over social media and order yours today.
Hi, I'm Julie Michaels, and you're listening to Crazy Train Radio.